Yep.
We can.
Okay, good. So everybody, if you would, if you have questions during today's presentation, go ahead and um, unmute and ask the question or put them in the chat. And Marlena and Haley, if you guys would monitor for that and interrupt me because it's on a different screen and it's a little hard for me to see if somebody has a question. Meanwhile, we'll just proceed ahead with our session. So I want to thank DexPro for giving me a DexPro Dynamics for giving me a place to host these webinars. So these are specific to GP. So thank you, Marlena.
Well, thank you. That's our pleasure and honor to have someone like you, help our users.
Thanks. If I'm looking to the left, it's because I'm looking at your face. Thank you so much. So today we're going to be building a trial balance for accounts payable inside of Power BI using GP. And this is something you can do with the free version of Power BI. So if you download the desktop, that's where we're going to be building it. I would download it from the Microsoft Store so you're always on the latest version. And at the end, I'll give you a link to a form that you could fill out, and I'll send you a link to basically this report built out. So all you have to do is put in your SQL information and your credentials, and you'll have it for you. And then you could also tear mine apart and build your own and do a lot more very powerful, cool things with it. We're going to stick to pretty much basics here because we only have an hour. Forgive me for cheating and going through my slide deck in this particular fashion. But again, I wanted to say a special thanks to Marlena and her team at DexPro Dynamics for, again, giving me a foundation. Next month, we already have it scheduled, so look for the register event. We're going to be building a cash flow with Power BI, and I'm also going to show you some ways where you could verify some of the numbers between what's in bank reconciliation and what is in the general ledger bank account. So I'll give you a few tips on that, and again, we'll have another free template courtesy of DexPro. Okay, our agenda for today, it's going to be fast, it's going to be furious, as always. I think I constantly run about 80 all the time. Although it's funny, my dream car is a Maserati, but I want to get on the interstate and drive 50 just to tick people off because I think it's funny. I have a weird sense of humor, so you have to ignore me. We're going to be doing two things. We're going to build an AP trial balance. So this is where we'll spend the bulk of our time. And then if you have multiple companies, I'm going to show you how to take that and alter it so that you could have a multi-company accounts payable trial balance, even though everything inside of them are completely separate. So I'm going to show you how to do that with GP today. So again, this is all GP. If you're not a GP person though, you might pick up some tips and tricks on data modeling as we go through. I am going to use two out-of-the-box views that are in GP, and these come automatically with GP. They're foundations for the Excel refreshable reports in GP. One is for vendors and one is for payables transactions. So we're going to be looking at both of those pieces of information. They're pretty inclusive of everything that's out there. They already exist, so it makes sense to use them. So you'll need to make sure that your credentials have access to using these two views, and they're stored in the company. And if you want to do the multi-company consolidation, you need to make sure you have access in all the companies you want to consolidate. Okay, so I'm gonna go ahead and pause and go straight into building it out. And then my slide deck, and again, when I send you the link for the template, I'll also send you a PDF of my slide deck because I do have some directions in it. And if you guys ask me a question, I might just add a slide in right then and there. So we can increase that. All right, so let me open up my Power BI. This is essentially what we're going to build out. This is the template that you would get, where you can see your total AP balance. We've got AP vendor by class. And we could do some other things as well to make it a lot more powerful. We could come in, for example, if we wanted to see if there's any vendors on hold, you could come in, add a little slicer right here. Can I just populate this? And I'm going to drop that into the status. So now I can see, are there any vendors on hold? Now, in this case, I don't have any vendors on hold. I'm just using the sample Fabricam data, which is way out in the future or way in the past. I'm not sure which. So depending on how we get that going, I might need to check that out, but we just need to keep that in mind. Okay, so let's also change this from vendor hold to transaction hold or document hold. And we do have some documents on hold. So this is a great way to better utilize the feature in GP of what documents are on hold, because that's something that a lot of people don't really pay attention to. So now I can see A Travel and Associated Insurance do indeed have some documents on hold, and I can see those pulled right out. So let's go ahead and build from scratch. I don't expect you to follow along, but one of the things that you can do is watch the video later and do it on your own data if you want to. So, but then if you watch it all later, you won't get that cool template. All right, it's opening on another monitor. As always, I'm in my COVID desk arrangement, so it's a little awkward. I have to keep looking to the left, but this is Power BI Desktop in the latest version. And so what we're going to do first is we're going to connect to our data. And I said we had two pieces of data where we're going to connect to: the vendor and the payables transaction. So to do that, I'm going to simply click on Get Data, which is up here in the top. I'm going to click on the icon. Whenever you see the down arrow there, that means you have multiple options or get a drop-down list, and clicking on the icon will take you to the default. So once I click on that, I get this Get Data window, and I could choose what my data source is. Now GP is stored in a database, so I'm going to select Database, and I'm going to select SQL Server. And I should point out that this is dealing with an on-prem database. So let me be clear about that. So if you have it hosted or you have it on a virtual machine somewhere, then you'd be running the desktop on that virtual machine and getting access to it. If you have APIs built into your GP, or you're using one of the hosters that provide APIs, then in that particular case, you wouldn't use database. You'd go about it a little bit different method, but you could still get access probably to the vendor. Talk to your hoster about that. Okay, so just wanted to point those two things out. All right, so I've got the database set up here, and I'm going to go ahead and connect directly to the database itself. Now, doing that, it first prompts me right away for my server and my database. This is my SQL server. So I'm going to enter in the name of my SQL server, which is BusyBee, and the name of my database I'm going to get to. I'm again looking at Fabricam. So I'm going to connect to the two database. And I want to point out, if you use the template I gave you, when you double click on it to open it up, it'll open up in the Power BI desktop. You need to make sure you're on that latest version, just in case, because I built it on the latest version. And it's going to ask you for your server name and your database automatically, and then it'll do all the rest of the work for you. So I'm going to go ahead and click on OK, and I'll show you how I get it to ask as we go along. And I'm going to get a navigator window that pops up that shows me all of the views, tables, and stored procedures in this database. Had I not put the name of the database, that was optional, I would have been first asked, what database do you want? So now I have views. You could see, let me zoom in again. You could see the views. I've got that little double window there. If I were to type in something like that, you could see these are tables. So this is SQL table. And if I wanted to, I could also get in and see functions or stored procedures, and these are set up as functions. So that's what we're using. So I'm going to look up for vendor, and I want the view. I find it's probably better if you connect to a view if you're not someone who's real familiar with a database. One, because it's easier to gain access to just the view as opposed to all of the tables that you would need access to. And the naming of the columns make more sense. So it's much easier for a citizen developer to do this, meaning you don't have to be someone super familiar with the database. They kind of do the work for you. And what I love about the GP views, and they're easy to spot because they have names that make sense, like vendors instead of PM00200 or 300 or so forth. But what I love about them is the fact that there already exists, so you don't have to do anything. You don't have to try to figure out what the fields are. Almost everything's done for them, and you're familiar with them because you use SmartList. And if I select vendor here, I'm going to see a preview of it, and there are tons and tons of columns in here. And one of the things about that's the equivalent to going into SmartList and going to vendors, adding columns and adding every single column plus a few. So there's a lot out there. But I want vendors, so I'm going to click on the box, and the preview helps me ensure that I'm getting the one I want. And I also want payables transactions, and so I'm going to go ahead and click on that. So I could add both at the same time. And when I do that, I'm going to go ahead and click on transform. Now by doing that, it's going to open up in a different screen, but it's going to open up the query editor. And there we go. Okay, it opens up the query editor, which is very similar to the query editor in Excel. This one just updates more, so this one has more features. And so, and if you use CDS, it's similar to the, that's even a subset of this. So this is the really rockin' query editor here. And we could do a lot of work without having to be a developer, a pro developer. We can do a lot to model our data and get it the way we want by being citizen developer. Now over on the left, you can see our two queries. In the middle, we see our data, and then on the right, we have our query settings. And we're going to start modeling our data. So we're going to start with the vendors here. So I've got vendors selected, and I have what I call Belinda's 3 rules. And the 3 rules are: you name the query to something that makes sense to the most technologically improficient person in the company. So vendors works. I'm not going to change that, and I'm going to cheat for a minute here. Whoops, I just opened up Postman. I'm going to open up my slide deck so I can see what columns I want. And let me close Postman out. Okay, so the second rule is to remove any columns you don't need. In the bottom left corner, if I were to scroll down, I can see this has 166 columns, and there's only 105 rows. I do not need 166 columns on my vendors. So what I'm going to do on the Home tab, I'm going to go through, and click on the Choose Column icon, and I get this really cool window that allows me to pick and choose which columns I want. Now, I'm not going to keep that many columns, so I don't want to unclick 150 columns. So I'm going to unselect all and then pick and choose the one I want. And I'm going to look at my cheat sheet here so I don't have to spend time going through the list. But I'm going to choose vendor ID, vendor name. I'm going to also come in and choose 1099 type. I'm going to look for hold. And one of the things I could do is use the search to help me find it. So I'm going to choose hold. And I'm going to choose vendor class ID, vendor status. And I also want the 1099 box. So I'm going to select that. And then now, if I could clear that out if I want to, but I've only selected a handful of columns. And if I click OK, I'm now down to 7 columns. I could actually see them all on the screen. So I would have had to delete 159 columns or remove it. So this is a much better method of doing that. Now I even say err on the side of caution. If you think you don't need it, don't add it. Keep it unadded, because you could always come back in on this applied step and click on this gear and add it, and then keep on working. So if you think you don't need it, then get rid of it, because it'll be a lot easier for your end users. And my third and final rule is verify the data type of each one of these. So I'm going to zoom in for a moment here. I have vendor highlighted and I see ABC. If I click on that, I can see that's text, and that's right. I want my vendor ID to be text. Now also, if I look up here in the top right, I could see on the home ribbon that the data type is set to text. So I want to point that out. Vendor name text, 1099 text, hold text, vendor class text, vendor status text. Okay, they're all text. So that meets that particular criteria. Now, another thing that I know, I'm going to be doing a join between these two tables by vendor ID. So one of the things I want to do is get rid of like any empty space that might be there. Sometimes, and I'm sure you've noticed this, there's like empty space after, and like my name Belinda is 7 characters. If the field is 10 characters long, sometimes you'll see Belinda space, 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 and sometimes you'll see Belinda. And if that's the case, those won't equal each other. So what we're going to do is trim off any excess space. And it's very simple to do. The easiest way to do it, I'll show you the roundabout way on payables. But if you right mouse click and go to transform, there's an option called trim and done. That's it. Now, any excess space at the beginning or the end is off. So that's pretty cool. Let me close out my little window here. Okay, so everything else in here looks pretty good. I've just cleaned that up. I'm happy with the way everything else is working. If I was going to connect using vendor class, I might want to clean that up a bit, but this all makes me happy. And if you want to do a trim on all of your text fields, that's fine. Now, I do want to double check my column names as well. I'll keep vendor ID, but I don't need vendor name. So I'm just double clicking on it and renaming these to something that makes sense. And in this case, I'm going to put vendor before the vendor type ID. And let's see, on hold, because I could have a document hold as well. I'm going to rename that to vendor. I've got vendor class, vendor status, and let me also put vendor right there. Okay, so now I've identified these as being different ones. And the reason why I put vendor on the 1099 ones, if I want to see how a transaction or a 1099 transaction is recorded compared to like which box it's in, compared to what the vendor set up, that would be very helpful. Otherwise, they would have exactly the same names. So now I'm going to come down to payables. This one has 301 columns, so we know we want to do work here. But the first thing I'm doing is change the name. I'm just going to put a space between those to make it easier for whoever's working. We don't need to worry about spaces when we're working inside of Power BI in the names. As a matter of fact, put them in. Don't try to do it programmer-ish, which is a Belinda word. Just do it with a space because it'll make it easier for users. I definitely want to look at my cheat sheet now because I would have to remove a lot of columns. So I'm going to go to choose columns again. I'm going to unselect and I'm going to pick the ones I want. So I've got voucher and vendor. I need vendor, so I have something to link these two tables on. I'm going to get document type, document date, document number, current transaction amount, 1099 amount, and let's see, let's continue on our amount journey. Let's get the document amount. I should have put in document maybe. There it is. And now I want document status. Yeah, I should have used document. So there's the document status. And I want the due date. I want whether or not the transaction's on hold. And I want whether or not it's voided. And I want the document integer. I'll go through that explanation in a few. I want the 1099, let's just pull this up, type and box, and that covers everything that I want. So I'm going to go ahead and click on OK, and I went from 301 columns to 15, so much improved. Now let's check our data types. So voucher number is set to text. That's okay, even though it's a number. I'm quite happy with it being text. If I change it to number, I'm going to lose all the leading zeros, and I don't want to do that. I want to keep those leading zeros on, so if I look it up in GP, I could get a good comparison. I have vendor ID, document type, those are text. My date, my date is a date time. I could see a little time clock right there, and if I look up and select the date column, it's date time. So I'm going to change this one, actually up here, I'm going to change it this way so you could see that. I'll change it to date so we don't get the date. If GP rarely there's only a couple fields that track time. And when GP does track the time, it tracks the time separate than the date. So all your date fields you should set to date. And if it's one of those fields that does manage the time, like a purchase order approval, then set that one to be time only, right? That's one of the options. Then we have document number, which is a date, which is good because it could have a number in it. Current transaction amount, decimal, that's good. 1099 amount, decimal, that's good. And I'm going to have to keep going this way. Document status, text. Now on the due date, I'm going to click on here and change this one to date. See, there's also time. And I'm going to check date. Hold is text, voided is text. And I'm just looking at this little number right here, integer. It's okay that that's decimal. It's really a whole number. That's fine. 1099 type, whole number, and 1099 or text, and 1099 box is also text. Okay. So now what I want to do is, again, I know I'm going to be doing the join on the vendor. So I want to get rid of the fluff if there happens to be any. You could tell by clicking on it and then put your cursor down at the bottom. If it's at the very end, it probably doesn't have any spaces, but better safe than sorry. So I'm going to highlight the whole column. I am going to zoom in again. I don't want to make you guys drunk, but a couple times I'll do this. I'm going to click on transform. I'm going to show you the longer way to do it. And then under format, there's a trim option. So you can see why I like to do the right mouse click. Okay, so now we need to do a lot of cleanup on this particular piece of information here. So first of all, let's look at our voids. I included voids. Anytime you have transactions, you need to account for voids. Don't listen to anyone who says, oh, we never void, because someone might void by accident and clear something up. Better safe than sorry. We only have to do a tiny bit of work right now, and then it'll cover voids. If you're using your own custom views, then you could go ahead and make sure the voids are excluded in that. Now I have some unposted transactions. I could see that because they're listed unposted on the left. So the voided field is set to null because it hasn't been calculated yet. At the time it posts, it gets set to no. And then when you void, it turns into yes. So the first thing I want to do is change all of the nulls to no. So that way I could see, or you know, that way I don't have to worry about it if I don't want to. So actually, you know what? Let's skip that step. We can avoid that one. I'll show you that when we're doing the hold. Sorry about that. Okay, so I want to get rid of anything that is voided. So just like in Excel, if I were to go in and click on this drop-down list for a filter, I could see null, no, and yes. Now, if you don't see a yes, I could just unselect the yes. But if you don't see one, you could click on text filters and you could say does not equal. And then now you could either type in yes or try to find it in the list. I don't see it in the drop-down because it only shows me like the first X number. So I'll type it in, does not equal yes, and I'll go ahead and click on OK. And now, if I were to click on this filter list, notice my yes is unchecked, and so my voids have been excluded. Now, that's all I have to do to exclude my voids. Everything that I'm doing is getting tracked over here on the right. And you really should right mouse click and rename each step so you know what they are. They are renamed in my template, but with only an hour, I'm not going to do that right now. So now that I have voided or removed all my voids, I'm going to right mouse click on this void column and remove it. And I could do that because the step where it filters the row happens first, and now I no longer need my data. So every time I refresh, it's going to go through all of these steps. So now I have voids gone. So while I'm at it, let's go through and do with hold what I was talking about earlier. And that is that if it's on, we have no and yes, whether it's on hold or not, we could change that to unposted, the null to unposted, or we could change it to null if we want to. So actually, if we change it to unposted, we could also get rid of our document status. So why do we change it if it's null to unposted? So again, I could come up under transform and choose replace values, but I'm going to right mouse click and I'm going to choose replace values. And if it's a text field, you could only replace it with a text. And if it's a number, you can only replace it with a number. But I want to get rid of null. So I'm going to type in null and I'm going to replace it with unposted. And I'm going to go ahead and click on OK. So now it's the hold status is either unposted, yes or no. Okay, that's pretty cool. So I no longer need document status because I've got the unposted part covered, right? I can, just like you saw me put that hold slicer on, I could put the hold slicer on and then select that, you know, unselect unposted so that if I only want to see posted transactions. All right, so I just right mouse click and remove that column. All right, cool. Now I'm down to 13 columns. This is looking pretty good. All righty. So I actually have 3 columns here with numbers in it. I have the current transaction type, the document amount, and the current transaction amount is the unpaid balance, the document amount is the original document, and then I have my 1099 amount. Now I'm going to come over here and I have my different document types. And just like in Smart List, credits and payments are going to come through as positive numbers because in that particular table, they're just listing all the documents. So we need to account for that, which is why I included the integer type. So let me quickly swing over to one of my slides. And it probably would be easier if I looked at it this way. Integer, 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 integer. Reverse the sign, and I got a GP screen in here somewhere. Bear with me. I thought I had a GP one in here. Ding, 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 ding. Nope. Okay. Well, anyhow, in GP, I have GP right here, I'll just pull it up and show you. Okay, so I'm going to go into the payable setup and go into options. Now, right here, I can zoom in, we have 7 different options. Now, one of the things about using the document type is this is a changeable field in GP. So if I don't want it to say credit memo, I want it to say credit, I could do that. Now, keep that in mind that someone could change that at any time. So if I create the calculation of whether something's positive or negative based off of the description, which is what I would see, I would have issues because they could change that. And they could also change the code if I included that. So I want to use the integers, and the integers are predefined and set. So this is like 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. GP is pretty good about that. So 4, 5, and 6 need to be negative, and all of the rest need to be positive. So that's what we're going to do when we reverse that out. I'm going to discard that, minimize. And so this is why I have the integers pulled up here, and I could see 1, 2, 1, 5, and 6. So 5 and 6 are actually negative amounts, and 1s are positive. So I need to account for that. And so that's what I'm going to do now. And I'm actually only going to, for the sake of this and for the sake of time, I'm going to go ahead and get rid of 1099, or actually I'll get rid of the document amount. I don't know which one to use. Let's see. I'm going to get rid of everything except the current transaction amount. I normally wouldn't have you do that, but I'm just going to use this one, the balance column. That's all I'm going to get is the balance, right? Okay, so this is all that positive, where everything's listed as a positive number. What I'm going to do is create a situation where I also have a column of the negative amount for all of these. So I'm going to highlight this column, and then what I'm going to do is go up to the top and click on Add Column. And right now, because it knows this is a number field, the standard option is lit up. Notice the date and time ones are not. And I'm going to click on this and multiply it times a -1. So now I have a negative version, a negative counterpart for the current transaction amount. And so I'm just going to leave it named multiplication right now. So I have a positive version and a negative version. Now I could do an if statement on this integer. I could say if it is 1, then it should be positive, and so forth. And I know there could only be 7 kinds of documents, and I know 4, 5, and 6 are the only ones that would be negative. So what I'm going to do is up at the top, click on Add Column again and do a conditional column. And I'm going to call this balance. And in this particular case, I have the column name here. And the column name is going to be balance. And then here I'm going to say if the integer, the document integer type, is less than, is less than 4, because 4, 5, and 6 are negative. If it's less than 4, then I want to get, I clicked on this little box, the column called current transaction amount. And then I'm going to add another clause because 7 is out there by itself. That's at scheduled payments. I know you might be thinking, hey, we never use that, but someone, it's really a cool feature, and someone might eventually, especially during the times of pandemic, you might need to do scheduled payments and you want to track them in your GP. So you might start using them. So, and it's too easy just to add one extra line in here. So I'm going to choose the document integer type equals 7. And then I'm going to change this to another column, and I'm going to get that multiple, oh, sorry, wrong. I'm going to get the current transaction amount. And if it's not less than 4 or 7, it must be one of those negative values. So I'm going to go in and choose that multiplication one, which is the negative column. So now if I look at this, let me set this to decimal. If I look at this, I have negative amounts, which are for my credit memos and payments that are unapplied. And then everything else is set to a positive amount. Pretty cool, huh? So now I could get rid of my, actually I'm going to get rid of all the 1099s on this. I could get rid of the negative version, the positive version, and the integer column. I can get rid of all those and remove all those columns. And now I just have that balance column that's out there. And if I wanted to, because I'm only dealing with transactions that have balances, in this one I removed it, I'm going to go ahead and just remove the 0 option as well. And so this will only show the other ones. I wouldn't normally do that because then you could do analysis of what your AP was in the past. So I normally wouldn't actually add all of that in. Okay, or wouldn't actually exclude the 0 balances. I'd want to keep them so I could look at what we were invoiced in previous periods. So, okay, now that I have all of that done, I want to do an aging bucket, right? So I want to age this. Now I have the due date right here. So I'm going to highlight the due date column, and I'm going to, time to zoom again. And I'm going to come up under add column again here. And with the due date selected, now the date option is available. So I'm going to select this and I'm going to choose age. And now I have this column that has 4 numbers in it, separated by colons. That's days from whatever system date today is, and that due date, days, hours, minutes, and seconds. So I want it to only be days. So I'm going to change it from the duration to, which is right there, to a whole number. So now I'm only looking at days. Now, if it's in the future, because again, I'm looking at Fabricam, it's showing up as a negative number. And I probably don't want that to happen. I want it, if it's in the future, I want it to be how many days until it is due versus how many days it's past due. So what I'm going to do when I have this highlighted, and instead of adding a column like we did before and multiplying it times 1, I'm simply going to go to transform up here at the top. And I'm going to just transform this column. While I have it highlighted, the number section is set here. And I could again choose, just like I did before, to multiply it times -1. And now that entire column is set where if it's in the future, it's a positive number. And if it's negative, or if it's in the past, it's negative. So now I have how many days it is. So now all I need to do is go through and create my bucket. So what I'm going to do is click on add column again, add one more conditional column like we've done. And I'm just going to call this aging bucket. And I'll do my aging report. So I'm going to say if the age is less than, 0. And it recognizes this as a number. So the fact that the operator is less than is just because it knows it's dealing with a number column. If I was dealing with a text column, it would be like starts with and ends with and so forth. So if that age is 0, and this time I'm actually selecting value or entering in values in the output, not just selecting a column. Remember before we clicked on the list and we selected a column. Here I'm going to select an output. And the output I'm going to select is, and I'm going to put these in order where if they appeared alphabetically, they would be in the order I want. So I'm going to say, actually, let's make it less than or equal to. And then 0 days or past due. All right, and now I'm going to add another clause here, and I'm going to get a little crazy so that we have some aging buckets here, and I'm not going to add that many, but I clicked on add a clause again. I'm going to do an age. This time I'll do is less than, and let me do less than 2000, and then I'll say 1, 2. You wouldn't normally do them like this, but you could create your aging buckets any way you want. So I'm going to do one more here, is less than 3,000 and 2,000 to 299 days. And this one will be 3,000 and over. Okay. Cool. And now I'm going to go simply click on OK. And now I have this aging bucket the way I want. Whenever you add a column, it doesn't go through and try to figure out what type it is. So every column you add, you do need to set the data type. And setting the data type is how this column will act, not how it will appear. So now that I've got the aging bucket done, I could go ahead and get rid of this age here. So I'm going to just go ahead and click on remove. You don't have to remove it. You could just hide it if you want to. All right, so now I have 9 columns that represent my accounts payable. So I'm going to click on home and then just simply go to close and apply. So, oh, I was going to put a parameter in, but I'll show you that in a few moments. Okay. Now that we have that done, I mean, data modeling could continue within your Power BI. Here are my 2 queries here. And if I go into the data mode on the left, I was in report mode, and then we have data mode. Here are my 2 queries where I can see the data. And then I have this model mode, which basically is a relationship mode. And out of the box, it's trying to figure out what the relationship is. And if I hover over the link, I could see it's connecting on vendor ID, and I have this 1 over here, meaning the vendor will appear 1 time here and many times over here. I've got the asterisk. And if you double click on that, you could actually see it's connected by vendor ID. You can only connect a relationship by 1 table. If you try to connect other relationships, you'll have inactive relationships. So that means sometimes you have to go through and create your own unique fields that are used just for the purpose of creating relationships. Now I have vendor ID in both columns. It might confuse somebody which one to use. So I'm going to take the vendor ID over here. I'm going to click on it. I'm going to right mouse click, and I'm going to choose to hide in report view. And if you look very closely, if I zoom in here, you can see it's a little eyeball with a line running through it. And the data's still there. If I go into data mode over here, I can click on payables, and I could still see the vendor information, but it's dimmed out. And that will just make it easier for whoever's doing it. They won't ask, which vendor ID do I use? If they want the vendor ID, it'll make sense for them to go to the vendor area. Now, if you want to change how your data appears, this is where we could do it. And you could do it on the reports screen as well. It's just a little easier right here. If I highlight this column, then I'm going to automatically, in the newer versions, have this area called column tools, where I could change the format. I don't want that whole long date. I just want the date to appear the way we use dates. And my apologies for anyone who may not be in the US, that this is in US format. If the default would be for whatever format your system is. So if you're in Europe, for example, it would not be in that particular format. Due date, I'm going to do the same thing right here. For my balance, I want this to be in dollars. So more particularly like 5,000 here, I want it to be $5,000. Now, a side note, one of the cool things we could have done from vendors, and if we have time, maybe we'll do it. We could have actually added in, if you put in, populate your credit limit with a vendor, you could put that in so you can see how much credit you have with a vendor remaining. So I have my balance here again under tools. This time I'm going to click on the dollar sign, or I could have selected currency from the format here. And I want to hard code those 2 decimal places in. If you want it to be hard coded with 0 decimal places, then feel free to do so. But that's going to be how it reacts. Now that we have all that done, we just need to create our visual. So one of the things I like to do before I get started is I like to click on this paint roller in the visualization pane. The visualization pane is where we manage our visuals, which includes formatting. And right now I'm just looking at the blank canvas. So I'm just going to go into format right here, and I'm going to go to page background, and I'm going to simply add a little color. I like just to add gray, and I'm going to set that transparency to 0. It makes it easier to see your visuals when you add them to the screen. So let's start by adding in a title. So I'm going to click on insert up at the top, choose text box, and my title will be AP Aged Trial Balance. And I'm going to highlight that, and I'm going to, I like the font at 32, and then I'm going to reposition this. You'll notice the handlebars are around it. When the handlebars are around it, the visualization pane is set for this particular visual. Text is a visual, and I don't want a white background, so while I'm here, I'm going to go ahead and just slide that background off so that when I click off of it, the name just appears as you would expect right there, just like that. So let's add a visual in here that shows us our total AP balance. So I'm going to come over to the visualization pane again. Forgive me for zooming. And I'm going to select the 1, 2, 3, which is the card, and it's going to populate it right here. I'm going to slide it over so that we can see what it is I'm doing while we're all zoomed in. Now with my handlebars around that, I can see it's just looking for a field. So I'm going to come in, my balance is here in payables transactions. I could stretch that out to see it a little better. There's my balance, and you can see I have a sigma there that lets me know it's a numerical number that can sum. And I'm going to populate it in right here, and then here is my balance. Now it automatically rounded, so I'm going to now, with it still selected, go into the paint roller, do a little bit of cleanup on it. I'm going to go to general. Whoop, not general, sorry. Go to data label. I'm going to set that display unit from auto to none so it doesn't round, and then while I'm at it, I'm going to change that text size to 22 so it's a little smaller. And then also while I'm at it, the category is actually the name of the field. It's a little lighter. It's not really black. It's kind of like a dark gray. So I'm going to set it to black. And then I'm going to set this font to like 22. And so now if I unzoom, I've got my AP balance listed right there. And so that's nice, simple, clean, and easy to use. The cool thing about using cards like this is that once you publish it to the Power BI service, you could put an alert on it, and the alert would be like, if my AP balance goes above 2 million, let me know. Send me an email. Okay. Got that done. So now let's add one more visual up here. So this time I'm just going to put in my AP balance by vendor class. So I'm just going to add in a clustered column chart. Maybe put it right here. And in here, I've got an axis and a value. So I'm going to put the balance in the value. And in the access, I want to get the vendor class, which is actually in the vendor field. And because I have those related to each other, it works for me. Okay, cool. While I'm at it, before I put in the whole AP trial balance, I'm going to add in a slicer. So I added a slicer right up here. And a slicer is just like a slicer inside of Excel. And then here I'm going to go through and grab that vendor hold that we put in into the field. So, not vendor hold, document hold. That's where we put in whether or not it was unposted. I should have put that in. So now I can see, like, is it unposted? Yes, no, or unposted. Okay, now that I've got that done, let me just clean this up a little bit right here. Let's put in our AP trial balance. So there is a visual out there called a matrix, and it's right to the between the R and the table. There's the slicer. So I'm going to click on the matrix, and the matrix is like a pivot table inside of Excel. So I'm going to just stretch it out a bit, and I'm going to start populating it. Now, over in the visualization pane, you can see we have rows, columns, and values. And this is just like what you see in a pivot table, except it also has filters. And of course, we could have a whole pane for filters, or we could use slicers for filters, or we could even use interactions between things. You notice when I click on this vendor class, my AP balance changes. So we can create interactions between our visuals. So I'm going to click back on here, and I'm going to start populating this. So I'm going to start with the vendor ID, and I'm going to drag it into row. There's my vendor ID. And now I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to take the balance and I'm going to put it in value. There's my balance. Notice that the total matches the total up here. And again, if I select one of these, the total then still matches. Okay, so everything's working great. Now for the legend, I want to get that aging, or not for the legend, oops, sorry, let me click back down here. For the columns, I want to take the aging buckets and put them in here. And now I have my aging buckets displaying across. Now, this looks good, but I want to add more information in my row. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to come in and add in vendor name right under row. And let me zoom in and I'll show you what I'm doing. Okay, so I got the vendor name in there. I also want to maybe get the document type. So I'm going to drag that down, and then I'm going to get the document number. And if I want to, I can even add in the document date or maybe even the voucher number, right? So I have all this information available to me. Now, when you do that, it looks like this, and you'd have to like expand, or if I drill down to everything to see everything all the way to the date, it really looks quite messy. And so I do what I do in all pivot tables in Excel. I change it to a tabular mode and remove subtotal. So I'm going to do that here. And I'm going to zoom in one more time, sorry. And I'm going to, with it highlighted, you can see my handlebars around it. I'm going to go to Format. And first I'll get rid of the subtotals. So I'm going to select that and just turn off the row subtotals. And then I'm going to open up the row header, and I'm going to turn off the stepped layout. And when I do that, now I have this information. So I can see all of the detail from my trial balance. And once again, if I grab this particular vendor class, and you could put these in any way you want, then I could see an age trial balance by the vendor class. There's the total, here's the age trial balance. If I want to see just what's unposted, I could click on unposted and look at it in this particular format, and then there's the grand total right there. So this is an age trial balance. So I have 11 minutes left. What I want to do is go back into Transform, and I want to show you how you can make it for multiple companies. And I also want to show you how I created a parameter to do that. So the first thing I'm going to do, if you just flat out need to change it for, yeah, I'll go ahead and do it this way. Okay, I'm going to start with the parameter. So in Query Editor, I'm going to select the parameter window, and I'm going to add a new parameter. And the first one I'll add in is SQL Server. And then normally you'd put a note, enter your SQL Server instant name here. A lot of people have discovered they don't have to set the type, but you need to, because when they don't do that, sometimes issues happen. So we have the type here, and the current value for this, I'm going to put in BusyBee. That's the name of my server. Now, if I click OK, I've got to reopen it back up. So I'm going to just click on New here, and we'll call this one DB. I'm going to call it DB1 because we're also going to make it multi-company. So this would be enter your company DB, which is 2. So I'm going to populate that. And then let me also add DB2. And again, I'm going to make this one also 2 because I only have the one database out there. Okay, so now that I have these set up, these different parameters, the first thing I want to do is, you can see them listed here and they're italicized because they're not really adding any data. And I could come right in here and change them if I want. But I'm going to go to vendors, and then over in the query settings, I'm going to click on this gear. And now this is where I initially entered in my connection information. I'm going to change this from server to or text to parameter, and it selected the first one in the list, which is SQL Server. And then here I'm going to set this one to parameter, and I'm going to make this DB1. Okay, so now I've created parameters, and I've also made it where if I just do a file export in Power BI and export a template, and you give it to someone else, they'll be prompted to enter in the company. So that's a great way to create a report for a different, take a report and use it for a different company. Now, what I want to do, I have payables here. I'm going to call this payables DB1 because I want to make this multiple companies, right? So I'm going to call this DB1. And we need to be able to identify what company we have. Now, there's a couple different ways we could do it. You could come in, and in this particular case, I'm going to do 2 different ways here. You could go to add column at the top, add a custom column, and I'm going to call this company. I'm going to add, within this column, I'm going to, just in double quotes, write Fabricam, the name of the company. Fabricam Inc., why not? And now I have this whole new column. I need to set this to text for every row that shows me this is Fabricam. Now what I'm going to do is over here on the left is right mouse click and duplicate this column. So now I'm going to make sure this is DB2, so it has a different name. And this time I'm going to come in again to the source. And, oh, I forgot to change my source up there. Okay. So I'm going to go to parameter and parameter again. And normally I'm going to come in and select DB2, where this one, let me let that finish. Where this one, and I wish I'd have done this first because then I wouldn't have to do it twice. I could have just duplicated. This one will be DB1. Okay. Now I'm going to come back in and let me make a change here. So this is where I added my company Fabricams, but in this company, instead of using Fabricam, I could just change the name, or what I could do is come in and use the parameter DB. Use the parameter. So I start typing DB. I'm going to select DB2, which is my parameter, and click OK. Now, mine are the same. So I did these different because I wanted you to see you could use the parameter name as well. But it wouldn't be a good move for me to do them for the parameter for both because they're both looking at 2. All right, now that I have that done, I want one query for all of my payables. So what I'm going to do is come up on the home, and I'm going to, one last zoom, I promise. On append, I'm going to click on the drop-down list. I'm going to choose append queries as new. And when I do that, I have DB2 and DB1. It doesn't matter which order. I'm stacking those on top of each other. All the columns are exactly the same. So now I have this third query here called append, and I'm going to call this payables transaction. Okay, now I don't want all of my data being duplicated. I don't want it being duplicated in size. So over on the left for payables 1, I'm going to right mouse click and I'm going to unselect enable load. And it's warning me that if I have any data out there using that one, and I do, I'm going to break it, but that's okay. And then I have payables transaction 2. I'm also going to remove the load. Now those are now italicized. Those are only being used to refresh. If I right mouse click, you can still see it's included in the refresh. It's refreshing the data and then it's merging it into a single query. So now when I close and apply, I still have just 2 queries. And the fact that I kept the same name, oh, I did transaction, not transactions. Let me go back. I was trying to be so slick so that I wouldn't break anything, but let me go back and do it again. Let me rename this to transactions. There you go. And now close and apply and see if I didn't break it. And yeah, okay, good, I didn't break it. All right, so now it's looking at payables transactions, but payables transactions now has this new field called company. So if I take this slicer and maybe I should have made that like a donut chart. And in my donut chart, I've got, I'm gonna put in, instead of legend, I'm gonna put in company. And then I'll put in balance. Okay, and they should be exactly half because I just duplicated the company. But now I can see my 2 companies. So if I, you can see that number's double now. If I want to look at Fabricam, I click on this one and that's Fabricam. This is all Fabricam. And I can alter these edits or these interactions. So that's kind of it in a super big and quick nutshell. So I go through a lot of the steps here. And if you guys have any questions, this is the QR code, or you could go to bit.ly, and this is case sensitive. So bit.ly DexPro, which is lowercase Belinda with an upper B. And I will put this in the chat. Then if you fill this out, there's the chat. There we go. Then you could get a copy of that, that deck, or of my deck, and you could get a copy of the printout. Were there any questions? I know that was really fast and furious, but don't see questions. Any comments? Feel free to write something in the chat if you want to. You don't have to actually speak. Put my chat over here.
Maybe
No?
Haley unmute everyone just in case.
Yeah,
Here, we got a question.
okay. Oh, I see. If you unselect columns, will it make your query load faster? Yes, it will make it load. Well, it makes the it makes the size of the data smaller. So you know what? I'm going to step back. I answered yes too fast because it does make the size of the database significantly smaller, even though when you go back in there and you go back to that previous step, you can still see the 300 columns. I don't know that it makes it load any faster. So I'm a big advocate of creating custom views if you want, and Victoria Uden's got quite a few of them. Just make sure that it does include things like the integer rather than trying to use the name, because you can get yourself in a mess if you do that. Also, a lot of her views, they're fantastic, but they don't include the schedules if you schedule payments. So, and the same would be true for receivables, exactly the same, using the integer and then making sure you have the scheduled payment, because there's like 9 data types in receivables. So it will, yeah, so it'll definitely make it significantly smaller. I don't know that it'll make the load any faster, but if you put this on the web and publish it to Power BI service, and you're using a gateway, then the gateway, you could schedule it to refresh up to 8 times a day and you don't have to worry about it. Like I have the COVID, Microsoft has a COVID response report. I have that on my Power BI and it schedules once a day for me. And I think it schedules like 4 times a day, but it takes a good 5 minutes to load because it's loading data from 50 different states. And so it's quite intensive. And so I just let it run at night. When I look at the report, I look at it on my iPad and then I don't have to worry about refreshing. Any other questions? Okay, well, make sure you fill out that form so that you could get access to the, I'll send you the free template and then you'll automatically have a starting point. You won't even have to think about it. And one final word of thought here, another thanks again to Marlene and her team for giving me a platform to chat with you guys.
Well, thank you everyone for joining. Great session, Belinda, as always. And we are going to have that recorded session available also on our website as well.
Fabulous. Fabulous.
Great. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Bye, everyone.
Bye.